Some prisons were not just built to hold people, they were built to break them. Behind stone walls, steel doors, underground cells, death rows, riots, disappearances, and stories of ghosts, these places became more than correctional facilities. They became symbols of fear. Today, we're counting down the top 9 scariest prisons with disturbing histories. Stay until number 1, because the final prison began as an experiment in redemption and became one of the most terrifying examples of isolation ever created. Before we begin, tell us in the comments which prison you think would be the worst to spend one night inside. Number 9. Bodmin Jail, England. This prison has been closed for almost a century, but many visitors believe something inside never left. In Cornwall, England, Bodmin Jail rises from the landscape like a dark stone warning. Its corridors are narrow, its walls are thick. The rooms feel cold even before anyone tells you what happened there. Walk through its old passageways, and the building seems to hold sound differently. Footsteps echo too long. Shadows gather in corners, and every empty cell feels like it is waiting for someone to speak. Bodmin Jail was built in 1779 and operated for more than 150 years before closing in 1927. During its years of operation, it held prisoners under harsh conditions, including overcrowding, hard labor, punishment, and executions. Today, part of its reputation comes from its history. One of the most chilling stories connected to Bodmin Jail involves footage captured by paranormal investigators. A strange figure was reportedly seen drifting across the end of a corridor after the name William was called out. Some linked it to William Hampton, the last man executed at the jail in 1909. Whether you believe the footage or not, the atmosphere of the place does half the work. Bodmin does not need to prove it is haunted. It already feels like it is. More than 50 people were executed at Bodmin Jail. Among the spirits said to haunt the place is Selina Wadj, a young woman from the 19th century whose tragic story has become part of the jail's legend. For tourists, it is a haunted attraction. For history, it is a reminder of how punishment once looked: cold, public, final, and often brutal. From haunted stone corridors in England, we move to the mountains of Colorado and one of the most secure prisons in America. Number 8. ADX Florence, United States. At ADX Florence, the terror is not chaos. It is silence. Deep in Colorado, surrounded by desert, mountains, fences, cameras, and armed security, ADX Florence looks less like a prison and more like a machine built to erase human contact. The cells are concrete, the windows are narrow, the doors are heavy. Movement is controlled down to the smallest detail. There are no crowds, no open yards, no normal prison noise, just walls, cameras, routines, and time. ADX Florence is often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. It was designed to hold some of the most dangerous inmates in the United States. But what makes ADX so frightening is not constant violence. It is extreme control. Inmates spend most of their time alone in small concrete cells. Meals are delivered through slots. Some prisoners have reportedly developed severe mental health problems. This prison does not need to be loud to be terrifying. It can destroy a person quietly. ADX Florence became a symbol of Supermax incarceration. It raises a hard question. How much isolation can a human mind take before punishment turns into psychological damage? For the inmate, it can feel like being sealed away while still alive. But ADX controls people through silence. The next prison became infamous because control inside almost disappeared completely. From America's Supermax isolation, we travel to Venezuela, where one prison became a place where gangs held the real power. Imagine a prison where guards barely enter entire sections. Cell blocks are controlled by inmates. Weapons are everywhere. Food, water, protection, safety, and survival depend on who you know and who controls the wing. There is no feeling of order, only tension. A hallway can become a battlefield. A kitchen can become a power center. A cell can become either shelter or a trap. La Sabaneta prison in Venezuela became notorious for overcrowding, corruption, gang control, disease, lack of medical care, and extreme violence. Guards were so outnumbered and outpowered in certain areas that inmates effectively ruled parts of the facility. This is one of the most frightening forms of prison failure. Not a prison that controls too much, a prison that controls too little. Inside La Sabaneta, survival was not guaranteed by the system. Survival depended on power. But La Sabaneta was terrifying because inmates controlled the prison. The next one was terrifying because overcrowding turned human bodies into a living nightmare. From Venezuela, we moved to Rwanda, where one prison became infamous for conditions almost impossible to imagine. Number 6, Gitarama Prison, Rwanda. Picture thousands of prisoners crammed into a space built for only a fraction of them. Bodies pressed together, air barely moving, floors packed with people who cannot lie down properly, disease spreading through heat, sweat, waste, hunger, and exhaustion. There is no privacy, no rest, no clean escape from the smell, no room for the body to feel human. Gitarama Prison, now known as Muhanga Prison, became notorious after the Rwanda genocide period for extreme overcrowding and horrific living conditions. The source describes a prison originally designed for around 400 people swelling to thousands. This is what makes Gitarama so disturbing. It was not only a place of confinement, it became a place where overcrowding itself was a weapon. But Gitarama shows horror through overcrowding. The next prison became infamous through one of the bloodiest prison crackdowns in modern history. From Rwanda, we traveled to Brazil, where a riot ended in a massacre that shocked the world. Number 5. Carandiru Penitentiary, Brazil. Carandiru was not just overcrowded, it was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Tension moved through the facility like electricity before a storm. There were too many people, too little sanitation, too much violence, and not enough control to stop disaster from coming. But the darkest moment came in 1992. A prison riot broke out. Military police stormed the facility. When it was over, 111 inmates were dead. Many considered the 1992 Carandiru massacre less of a riot response and more like an execution. The event brought international attention to the appalling conditions inside the prison. The prison did not just expose inmate violence, it exposed the terrifying force of the state when order collapses and armed response becomes uncontrolled. Carandiru became one of the most infamous prisons in Latin America. Its history forced public attention onto overcrowding, violence, corruption, prison reform, and state accountability. The prison was eventually closed in 2002 and largely demolished. But demolition did not erase what happened there. The name Carandiru still carries the weight of 111 lives. We are halfway through, and every prison so far has shown a different kind of fear: ghosts, isolation, gang control, and overcrowding. Which one feels the most terrifying to you? Drop your answer before we reach number 1. But Carandiru's horror was public and violent. The next prison is terrifying because much of what happened there remained hidden behind dictatorship and secrecy. From Brazil's massacre-scarred prison, we move into the Syrian desert. Number 4, Tadmor Prison, Syria. This prison was called the Kingdom of Death and Madness for a reason. In the Syrian desert, Tadmor Prison stood isolated under a punishing sun. From the outside, it looked like a fortress of concrete and control. Inside, it became a place of fear, torment, political imprisonment, and silence. The desert made escape nearly impossible, the walls made hope feel distant, and the regime behind it made the prison infamous. Tadmor Prison became notorious under Hafez al-Assad's regime. In 1980, soldiers stormed the prison. The source describes more than 1,000 prisoners being killed, many in their sleep. The prison's reputation became so horrific that it stood as a symbol of state terror. Tadmor was feared because the system itself was the terror. The prison was reportedly closed, later reopened during the Syrian civil war, and eventually destroyed in 2015. But even destroyed buildings can leave ghosts in history. But Tadmor was a prison of dictatorship and fear. The next one became horrifying because entire families could vanish into it without a real trial. From the Syrian desert, we move to one of the most secretive prison systems on Earth. Number 3. Camp 22, North Korea. Some prisons punish individuals. Camp 22 was said to punish bloodlines. Only fences, labor, fear, and silence. Some prisoners were reportedly born inside such camps and never left. That is a level of confinement beyond normal prison punishment. It becomes inherited captivity. The source describes starvation, forced labor, public executions, coal mine work, and even claims from defectors about chemical weapons testing on prisoners. These claims are among the most disturbing in the entire transcript. The most chilling idea is not only that people suffered there, it is that many may have disappeared without the outside world ever knowing their names. That invisibility is the terror. A person can lose freedom, then identity, then existence in the eyes of the world. But Camp 22 is terrifying through secrecy and total control. From North Korea's hidden camp system, we travel to Thailand, where one prison earned a nickname that sounds almost sarcastic but hides a brutal reality. Number 2, Bangkok Central Prison, Thailand. They call it the Bangkok Hilton, but this is no luxury hotel. Bangkok Central Prison sits outside Bangkok, surrounded by walls, guards, heat, and a reputation heavy enough to reach far beyond Thailand. Inside, cells are crowded, routines are strict, the air feels tense, and for many inmates, the psychological weight of the place begins the moment they arrive. This is a prison known not only for confinement, but for death row. One of its most infamous practices involved leg irons. New inmates were required to wear them for a period after arrival, and death row inmates were historically associated with even harsher restraint practices. The source notes that death row inmates once had leg irons permanently welded on, though that practice has reportedly since been banned. The prison's nickname, Big Tiger, reflects the idea that it devours those sent inside. That image is disturbing. A prison not just as a building, but as a beast. Bangkok became internationally known, partly because foreign inmates have been held there, often under severe drug laws and long sentences. For many, the fear is not only the punishment itself, but the slow psychological pressure of heat, crowding, uncertainty, and death row nearby. It stands as one of the most feared active prisons in Asia. For the final prison, we return to the United States, where a revolutionary experiment in silence created one of the most haunted and disturbing prisons in the world. Number 1, Eastern State Penitentiary, United States. Number 1 is Eastern State Penitentiary, a prison built on the belief that silence and isolation could reform the human soul. But instead, it became one of the most chilling experiments in the history of incarceration. In Philadelphia, massive stone walls rise like a medieval fortress dropped into an American city. Inside, long corridors stretch outward like the spokes of a wheel. The cell blocks are quiet now, but the silence feels alive. Paint peels from the walls. Light falls through broken windows. Rusting doors hang in place. Cells sit empty, but they do not feel abandoned. They feel remembered. Eastern State Penitentiary opened in the 19th century and became one of the most influential prisons ever built. Its design was based on a Quaker-inspired belief that solitary reflection could lead prisoners toward repentance. The idea sounded humane compared to earlier brutal jails. Instead of public punishment, inmates would be isolated. They would be silent. They would reflect. They would become better through solitude. But the human mind is not built for endless isolation. Prisoners were kept apart from one another. Talking was forbidden. Noise was suppressed. The architecture itself was designed to separate human beings from normal social contact. What began as a reform idea became something far darker. Solitude turned into psychological pressure. Silence turned into punishment. Reflection turned into confinement inside the self. The source describes extreme punishments associated with the prison, including ice-cold water baths in winter, a mad chair designed to restrict circulation, and a dark basement cell known as the Hole, where prisoners could be left in complete darkness. That is why Eastern State is so disturbing. It was not simply violent in the obvious way. It weaponized silence. It created suffering without needing constant noise. Eastern State Penitentiary influenced prison design around the world. Its radial layout and isolation philosophy were studied and copied, but its legacy also forced people to question whether isolation truly reforms or slowly destroys. Today, visitors report shadowy figures, eerie cries, strange faces, and the feeling of being watched. Whether those hauntings are real or not, the history behind them is real enough. That is why Eastern State Penitentiary deserves number one. Not because it had the most bodies, not because it had the loudest riots, not because it was controlled by gangs or hidden by a dictatorship, but because it reveals something more unsettling. A prison can be terrifying even when it thinks it is doing good. It can speak the language of reform while building architecture for despair. It can claim to save the soul while crushing the mind. Eastern State reminds us that the scariest prisons are not always the ones filled with screaming. Sometimes the worst sound is no sound at all. Prisons are built to separate people from society, but the places on this list became more than places of confinement. They became warnings about power, punishment, neglect, secrecy, violence, isolation, and what happens when human beings disappear behind walls the rest of the world rarely sees. From Bodmin's haunted corridors and ADX Florence's silence, to La Sabaneta's gang control, Gitarama's overcrowding, Carandiru's massacre, Tadmor's terror, Camp 22's secrecy, Bangkok's death row, and Eastern State's isolation, each prison tells a different story about fear. Which prison shocked you the most? Would you spend a night inside any of them? Let us know in the comments. And subscribe for more documentary rankings about the darkest places, strangest histories, and most unbelievable locations on Earth. In the next video, we'll explore the most terrifying abandoned places people still claim are haunted.